with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Phronesis podcast. Thank you so much for checking in. We appreciate you doing so wherever you are in the world. Today, I have some longtime friends, and we have known each other probably, maybe 10, 15 years, Barry and Jen. I don't know how long it is, but I'm excited for this conversation. It came across social media that the second edition of your book, Ethical Leadership Theory to Practice, had come up. And I said, hey, we need to have a conversation. And so thanks to the two of you for being here today. For listeners, Dr. Barry Boyd is an associate professor in the Department of Agricultural Leadership, Education, and Communication at Texas A&M University. He holds the Thaman Professorship in Undergraduate Teaching Excellence. Dr. Boyd earned his doctorate from Texas A&M in 1991 with an emphasis in leadership education and instructional design. He teaches courses in personal and organizational leadership development, developing youth leadership organizations, and applied ethics and leadership. Dr. Boyd's research includes teaching and assessing critical thinking and using critical thinking in ethical decision-making. His team developed the Queen model of critical thinking as part of a NIFA higher education grant. He is also, and it's not in his bio, a former editor of the Journal of Leadership Education. So I'm going to put that into your bio, Dr. Boyd.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. We also have Dr. Jen Strong, and she is an associate professor of leadership in the Department of Agricultural Leadership, Education, and Communication at Texas A&M University. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in leadership theory, ethics, organizational culture, team development, and leadership in popular culture. Her research includes the impact of innovative teaching methods on effective leader development and the intersectionality between critical thinking behavior, ethics, and followership. Dr. Strong received her bachelor and master's degrees in leadership from Texas A&M and her Ph.D. from Oklahoma State University. To the two of you, thank you. What else do listeners need to know about you? Jen, what else do listeners need to know about you as we kind of begin our conversation?
I have two claims of fame. One of them is I beat Kelly Clarkson in a singing contest.
Wow. Okay. I like it.
I was 16. She was 14. It doesn't matter. It was high school. It's fine. And the other one was I almost got taken out by Secret Service one time, which was pretty fantastic. But that's besides being a leadership educator, professor, mom, a Disney fanatic. That's pretty much me.
I almost got taken out by Secret Service. Tell us the quick version of that story, please.
I was working out at our rec center here at Texas A&M as an undergraduate, and I was riding my bike. And I'm going to date myself for a second because you had to tune your Walkman into the radio station of the TV that you wanted to watch.
Okay.
Okay. So I was on my bike watching my show, pedaling around, not paying attention that there's some dudes walking around in like full three-piece suits, right?
Wow.
That should have been my first indication that something was wrong. So this guy comes up to me and says, "You're going to have to move." And I said, "No, this is my bike," because I'm 20 and stupid. And so he said, "No, you're going to need to move." And I said, "No, this is my bike." And I hear a voice from behind this man go, "I get it. The bike next to her is mine. I don't think she's a security threat. You can leave her be." And it was President George Bush. So Papa Bush was there to work out, and security wanted to sweep the area, thought I was a threat to national security. Turns out wasn't, and had an amazing bike ride with the president and had some really great conversations.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. Barry, can you top this? Kelly Clarkson, the president.
I can't even come close to that. Most of my experiences like that are ones I want to forget and probably have forgotten. Grandfather to 3 beautiful girls, my claim to fame. That's my plan for retirement, is to spend time with them and do those kinds of things.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's wonderful. We have our children's grandparents, 2 of them, their grandmother and grandfather, my wife's parents, live in our community, and it has just been absolutely incredible to have them a part of their lives. So that's absolutely wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, to the 2 of you, one thing caught my eye. As I mentioned to you before we started, my copy arrived yesterday. So literally I've kind of opened it up and just scanned and looked around. But I noticed 2 things. One is I love how you're situating this in kind of the collegiate context. You're meeting the students where they are in their world. So maybe talk a little bit about that. And then we'll see where the conversation takes us from there. What do you think?
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why we came back with a second edition. And as we looked at developing the text even, we couldn't find a text that had a really good mix of theory and application. They were either like super philosophical, lots of isms, or it was all just, how do we apply this? And we're going to skirt over it. So when we put the first edition together, we're like, hey, we need something that does a little bit of both. On the second edition, we actually got a lot of feedback from our students on how can we improve this? How can we make this a book that you're actually going to use? And you're not going to be like, yep, I'm going to peace out. And as soon as I can return that to the library or the bookstore, I'm going to return it to the bookstore. And one of the things they said was speak our language.
Nice.
And that's where the beginning of all the chapters came from, where we actually have a scenario that would make sense to an undergraduate college student, something that they probably have experienced or their friend or roommate has. And we really wanted to shape it in that way and use examples that they get, right? And we know andragogy is the most important thing of making those connections, and we just wanted to help them do that.
Awesome. I love it. I think situating it in their context so that it feels relevant and has that relevance, I think it's brilliant. Barry, anything you want to add?
No, it's just like Jen said, we couldn't find something that really worked for what we taught. And Kendall Hunt gives you the ability to build a book, which is what we did the first edition. We built that from chapters from other books in their catalog. But, again, that got us one step closer to what we wanted. But the second edition gets us right where we want to be with the students, and something hopefully they'll read, they can relate to, yet it still gets across the theory and it gets across the application as well.
Well, Barry, as you're working on this second edition, what are some things that kind of stood out for you? I mean, I just had a conversation with Jim Kouzes and Leadership Challenge. And they've been doing that work for almost 40 years. And I said, Jim, what have you observed as you've kind of done this work for 40 years? It's always a little bit interesting how things have shifted or changed in some ways between a first edition and a second edition. What were some things you observed in this go round as you updated the text?
In writing this second one, we did so much of the writing on it. In the first edition, we wrote nothing. We borrowed other people's work. And so in writing the second edition, I found it just really invigorating to be able to sit down and use my words and communicate things the way I thought they should be communicated. And then just bouncing these drafts back and forth between Jen and I was just a great mental exercise for me. And I enjoyed it a lot. And it makes me want to go out and find a third edition, or, makes me want to go write another one somewhere now.
Yeah.
Because I enjoyed the process a lot. Once you get in the groove, you can kind of sit there and just, right away. And that's how I worked. Jen worked a little differently.
Well, and what's interesting about that, and what I love that you kind of framed it as, look, we couldn't find something that fit what we were doing. So we've created it. We've created something that we feel is going to resonate with the students. Jen, what stood out for you in this round of updating the book?
Really taking into the students' feedback and putting that into the situation. And Barry and I fell into teaching a class on leadership ethics. And it was an interesting kind of how that happened was when I was doing my thesis work way back in the Stone Ages, one of my committee members said, "Hey, you're studying, do our students actually remember and utilize these leadership theories? But do we know if they're using them for good or for evil purposes?" That kind of resonated with me because it was such a great question. And when I came back and interviewed for my position here at A&M, that same faculty member was sitting into my interview. And I remembered him saying that. And one of the questions was, what are we missing in our curriculum and our leadership degrees? And I said, we talk about ethics and we skirt around ethics, but it's like followership, right? We don't have anything really truly focused on that. And a course in that wouldn't hurt anybody. So day 3 of my job, my department head came in and said, "Hey, remember in your interview when you said that thing? And you should teach ethics." And holy mackerel, I had taken a couple of philosophy classes throughout my educational career, but really I was not a subject matter expert at all. So how we framed the class was how we learned ethics ourselves, which it's almost in thirds. So the first third is about personal ethical development and ethical compass things. And the second is the isms. And the third is the application. So we've got all 3. And as I teach that with my students, I very much engage them because ethics is the study of the gray. I make the joke, and there's more than 50 shades. But it's that idea of they're in their formative years. I mean, holy mackerel, if we could go back and knowing what we know now and be an undergraduate student, I mean, we would rule the world. But they're trying to figure out, what do they believe is true? Mm-hmm. And within ethics, their struggle helped me with this new edition of what do we need to focus on? What do we need to have? Maybe a whole new chapter. So edition 2 has a couple of different chapters that the first edition doesn't have. And as Barry said, it's stuff that we actually wrote because we saw the need with our students. And we also talking to industry, them telling us, hey, we have a deficit in this, in your students and all students that are coming out of college. Can you help us address that? So a lot of that went into also edition 2.
Well, it's so interesting because I think you're exactly correct. I mean, this topic, and I've had a few episodes on the topic, and, Dr. Sean Hanna said, look, ethics is a team sport. And I always just loved that kind of phrasing. He was talking about some of his experiences in Desert Storm. And Craig Johnson has been on the podcast, and a few others where we've talked about this dimension. But it's the foundation. And from a sustainability standpoint, if you aren't locked in with this very firmly in place, right. Wow. I mean, and so it's so interesting from just if we kind of zoom out a little bit and look at what we oftentimes don't prioritize. I mean, I don't know what is more foundational than this. If you have a person in a position of authority, are you solid in who you are and what you stand for and what your red lines are? Because if not, you're going to be pushed in a lot of different directions and going to be challenged, right?
Absolutely.
So I love that. And something that I had not seen before is ethical followership. Would you talk a little bit about that? I mean, that's a really interesting, is this one of the chapters that you all focused on? Was this ethical followership chapter?
Actually, it is. That is one of the chapters that we wanted to add and really engage with. And that came from, again, talking to industry, studying followership and that phenomenon, getting involved in the Global Followership Conference. It was at Christopher Newport University. And one of the things that actually Ron Reggio was standing up and talking about was the fact that we don't have enough research on followership, that needs to be a push. Leadership has been looked at in all sorts of ways, but there's that deficit in followership. and kind of challenged us to say, how can we move that subdiscipline forward? And as we continued to talk, and I was in the middle of doing this book and editing, I was like, no, our students need to be able to talk about, how do I follow in an ethical way? Because we know not all leaders are ethical. And we know that there are ways that we need to govern ourselves so that we can then lead up, or we can lead the people around us, especially if you're a technical follower, but you're an opinion leader. And so how can you utilize your personal values, and how can you work through that with organizational values? And what happens when there's not so much of a connection there? And that was really kind of the genesis of that chapter of, how can we help our students when they're going to follow 80% of their career? How can we help them do that in a more ethical way?
Yeah. Barry, anything you want to add to that?
Well, we were teaching a little bit about ethical followership before we wrote this chapter in this book, and we really expanded it. But, you think back to the roles like in the Theranos study with Elizabeth Holmes. If it hadn't been for ethical followers, would they have ever discovered what she was doing? Maybe eventually, but it was really those ethical followers that said, this is wrong. We can't have her doing this. We'll try to get her on the right track. But she refused to get on the right ethical track with that. So, they had to go a different direction to bring it to the attention of people that could do something about it. That's just one example of how critical it is to be an ethical follower and what your roles are as an ethical follower.
Well, yes. I mean, very few acts of horror have been accomplished by just an individual throughout history. There was complicit behavior, whether it was overt or covert. And yes, I mean, if our students aren't moving into their career firmly standing in who they are and what they stand for, again, they're going to find themselves in some interesting situations. And having that compass of what is my true north and what is right and what is wrong, I think that Theranos case is just fascinating. What was it? It was a former Secretary of State's grandson. And he was like, hey, Grandpa, some shady stuff's happening. And Grandpa was like, no, we're good. I mean, he put himself out there, right? In a very, very, if I remember correctly, in a very, wow, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, at times I think he and the other young lady thought their life was in danger. They were being followed. They were being intimidated. And
Yes.
I think they really were worried about their safety for a while.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage to be an ethical follower.
It does. It does. A couple more things from the text. What else do you want to highlight for listeners so as they think about the resources they're using? What else stands out for you as something that you think? We've kind of talked about this ethical followership dimension, which is great, kind of the situating in the context of the students. What else stands out for you as something that is either resonating as you've used it with students or just as a unique feature of the book?
Well, we both believe that critical thinking is a big part of ethical thinking. And so there's a chapter on critical thinking, and we use the Queen model, which we developed to frame that. But we really emphasize utilizing those critical thinking behaviors when you're making ethical decisions. And so in class yesterday, in fact, we went through this whole Maui fire and the multiple decisions that could have been made better to prevent that from being as bad as it was. We walked through the Queen model. What behaviors could this person have engaged in to be able to make a much better ethical decision? So I think among ethical textbooks, including critical thinking as a basis for ethical thinking is kind of a unique feature of the book.
Talk a little bit about the Queen model.
Jen, I'll let you describe how you came up with that Queen acronym.
Again, there's always a great story. So as Barry and I were...
Kelly Clarkson was about to sing. And
Yeah, well, it does have something to do with the song. My multiple intelligence music is one of my highest multiple intelligences. So as we are doing this Delphi and collecting really great information about behaviors, so what makes the Queen different in critical thinking is that it's a behaviorally anchored model.
Okay.
So what can we actually see in students? What can they see in themselves? How can they actually do the thing instead of do we have the propensity for? So because of training, right, we can actually train behaviors. We can change behaviors. So as we are gathering that information and we're doing all the thematic coding and trying to figure that out, I was actually at a conference and there was a break in the research sessions, and I went outside and they had the music playing in the little pool area. And it was an international conference, but they were playing like yacht rock radio. So very like chill 70s and 80s.
A lot of Christopher Cross, yes.
A lot of Christopher Cross, yes. Yes, absolutely. And so it's that idea of I'm working, I've got it all on a lounge chair, I'm doing all the things. And a song called King of Wishful Thinking by Go West came on. So I'm singing in my head, like, I'll get over you. I know I will. And I'm sorting cards and I'm doing the research. And then it hit me as he was singing the refrain that maybe we should be the queen of critical thinking, because I knew that two of my themes, one was questioning. Okay, there's not a whole lot of Q words, right? And one was an E. So as I'm sitting there, I realized that the themes actually do go Q, U, E, E. Holy moly, this is great. So questioning, understanding, explaining, and evaluating. Then we had this other category of how do you put together all these different ideas and come up with something, Kidder talks about a trilemma. What's another great way to look at something? And so I right-click thesaurus and came up with the word neoteric. So the Queen model is questioning, understanding, explaining, evaluating, and neoteric thinking. So it's that idea of being able to take all of those skills, come up and see lots of different points of views, and then come up with something that's new. And so the Queen model was birthed that way. Since that, we have gone and done exploratory factor analysis. We've used it in classes. We've done it with lots of different organizations as well, because what we found when we do some of our consulting is that our for-profit and nonprofit are all saying critical thinking is one of the skills that is lacking in their followers, and they want to help that. So that has strengthened the model, and we're excited that, as Barry said, we think it is truly to think like a leader is to think like a critical leader.
That's great. So critical thinking kind of embedded in with that ethical decision-making and that whole kind of conversation. Anything else that stands out for you all as you think about this work? Obviously, as we speak, interfacing with the students. So you're going to get more feedback. You're going to get more data coming back to you, which is wonderful. Anything else stand out for you that might be of interest to listeners?
I think it's interesting if you're thinking about this whole book idea, is making sure that when you work with the publisher that you have options. So if you have a print version and an e-version, and what I've found this semester is really interesting is that it has less to do with price than I thought, because there is about a $30 difference between the e-version and the print version. But students have absolutely said, I'm not an ebook person. I need it in my hands. I like to highlight. I like to write notes on the side. And I haven't found a platform yet that I can do that well electronically. And then I had other students that said, no, absolutely. I want it electronic because my life is on this computer. And so I think having that dual modality is a really cool thing as you're putting together a textbook.
Exactly. And what you need to do now is the two of you need to record the audio book, right? Right. We need the audio books so they can be working out on their treadmill, and the president walks up and you'd be like, no, I'm listening to my ethical leadership theory to practice book. Leave me alone, sir.
That's right. I'm studying.
Well, okay. As we begin to wind down our time today, what's caught your attention that listeners might be interested in?
The book I'm reading right now and was a gift from a student who actually got it autographed by the author. And it's one of Jocko Willink's books. It's his second book. Extreme Ownership was his first book. Now I'm drawing a blank on the title of the second.
Talks about dichotomies, I believe. It's
Dichotomy of
dichotomies
leadership. That's it.
or something of that nature. Yeah, yeah. Okay, good.
And so among all the former military people that write leadership books, I think he's done the best job of writing it in a way that's different from everybody else to start with, but writing it in a way that I think is very effective. And you can take his lessons from, or his examples from the SEALs, and he can tie it right into corporate America because he does a lot of work in corporate America. And so I'm just finding it fascinating. His point of view and how he writes is totally different from almost any other airport leadership book that you get that's been written by former military people. And so Jocko's kind of my non-pleasure reading, even though it's kind of pleasurable. It's not my fiction reading right now.
Well, I just finished the Extreme Ownership. I had not listened to it. I had some students that it very much resonates with a certain faction of students. They had several recommend it to me. So I listened to it. What was interesting is at the end of the audiobook that I was listening to, they kind of teased the most recent book, The Dichotomy of Leadership. What I appreciated about him was that speaking of kind of after it interfaces with the world, they did a really nice job of saying, hey, here's what we've learned about extreme ownership. And this is what we've kind of experienced as we've better understand how people are consuming this. And, he even says, look, the name extreme ownership may have been a little bit misleading, that at times we don't need extreme ownership. It's more about shades of gray here, 50 shades or plus or more, right?
Right.
But it's those shades of gray. And what am I intentionally choosing in this moment? Is it extreme, or is it a situation where maybe that's not the appropriate? So that's then what kind of the primer then for where they came to the dichotomies. You're navigating these different tensions. So that's great. That's wonderful. I'll check out that book as well. And I did appreciate also, you have a story about what's happening in Ramadi, where they were stationed, and then you have an application to business and principle, and then an application to business, which I think was wonderful. It was brilliant. So I couldn't agree more. Jen, how about you?
Well, I am in the thick of my leadership and pop culture course.
Nice.
So I find myself being very tuned into what's going on in the world around me. But one of my favorite assignments that I give them is I give them a choice of 5 to 6 fiction books, and they have to choose one, and then they read it and analyze it for leadership. So I choose 6 based on very different genres to make sure that everybody kind of gets something they get excited about, but also things that are either in production or post-production or going to be released as a TV series or movie soon.
Okay.
So they can have the experience of being at a dinner party and say, I read the book. The book's better. Or I read the book, and this is actually the leadership that I found in the book.
Wow.
Yeah, it also helps on interviews when people ask this exact question, well, what are you reading? And they can say, hey, I just read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and that prequel to The Hunger Games is all about social contract theory. And so they can actually infuse those theoretical knowledges from their class into the conversation. So right now I am rereading those 6 books that I gave them so that I can grade their assignment and refresh my memory too.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So what would be a couple other books that are in that suite of books that you have them choose from?
So this semester, besides The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I've got The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
Okay.
Which is a Taylor Jenkins Reid novel. And what's great about her world is she truly sucks you in, and she takes a minor character from each of her books, and then the next book is about that major character. So Daisy Jones and the Six was just a very big thing on Amazon Prime. That's one of her books. And actually a character from that is one of Evelyn's husbands. So it's great how that kind of all works together. So that's more of the romance type genre. There's a really cool sci-fi one called The 3-Body Problem.
Oh.
There's some aliens involved. There's some issues with a totalitarian Chinese regime and how that interacts with some aliens. It's going to be on Netflix in January, so that's always exciting. I know they're kind of crazy ones, but trying to figure out, what these students might be interested in. Black Chalk is one. It's set at Oxford. It's about a secret society and the impacts of the secret society post-collegiate life. And it's a murder mystery, very intriguing psychological thriller type one. And Ron Howard is supposed to direct that one. So I'm very excited. But with the SAG-AFTRA stuff going on, we're not quite sure what's going on.
That's great. I had a course last spring on really technologies enabling disruption. So it's a graduate level course. We talk about different technologies every week. It might be blockchain this week, and then artificial intelligence, some version of large language models, or can we get to a place of general, artificial intelligence or super intelligence? And so sensor technology, Internet of Things, 3D printing, every week it's a different topic. And there was a gentleman in my community who has started an electric motorcycle company called Land, and it's incredible. It's really, really cool what they're doing. But he wanted the students to read Daisy Jones and the Six ahead of his session about motorcycles. Electric.
Interesting.
So I listened to the book and I reached out to him and I said, you got to help me understand here because I'm going to get the question myself. How does this apply? Well, it's about a band in the 70s. There's some sex, some drugs, some rock and roll. And I'm going to have to explain this if anyone asks. And he said, oh, it's more of kind of the spirit of what they were about. That's kind of our spirit. And I'm like, okay. Cool.
That's great.
As long as you can weave it in and land that plane, that's awesome. So
right.
It seems like you have a more directed purpose for it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, to the two of you, thank you so much for stopping in today, having the conversation. You know what? It's always a pleasure. So thankful for our friendships, and thank you so much for taking the time today. Okay, Barry and Jen said something I think that was really, really important. And I just finished the book by Jocko Willink and his co-author Leaf. And at the end of that book, they had a little intro of the next book. And I mentioned that in the podcast episode with Barry and Jen. And I love the fact that they kind of begin that by saying, look, we learned a ton. Once this content interfaced with the world, we learned a lot. And I think we heard that from Barry and Jen in this episode. For me, the practical wisdom is that, are you known as an individual who is open to feedback? Are you seeking that feedback out so that you have an awareness of how it's being consumed, how you can improve it, how you can improve? And for me, it is then a never-ending cycle of growth and development. As Carroll Dweck says, becoming is better than being. Are we open to that feedback so we can become the best versions of ourselves? As always, thanks so much for checking in, everyone. Take care. Be well. Bye-bye. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.